Good morning and welcome to Coffee Time with Kauffman, the comfortable place to talk about women's leadership. Today, I am pre-recording an interview with Sarah Jordan as we discuss the upside-down nature of having solutions that are looking for problems. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Maria. Thanks for having me today.
Nice to have you on the show. Sarah Jordan is a serial entrepreneur. She has worked at 5 startup companies, including co-founding 2, and she is currently working on a new stealth company. She founded and runs Skuld LLC, a company focused on developing and commercializing a new hybrid additive manufacturing process called AMEC. That is faster, cheaper, and greener than the alternatives. Prior to entrepreneurship, she worked in quality, operations, supply chain, marketing, and lean. Her education includes a BS in metallurgical engineering and an MS in materials science and engineering from The Ohio State University, as well as an MBA from Carnegie Mellon University. In her spare time, Sarah makes wine. She's active in Toastmasters, and she is finishing up her Ph.D. at Worcester Polytechnic Institute with her dissertation focused on the new AMEC processes capabilities. But before we get into the upside-down nature of having solutions that are looking for problems with Sarah, my name is Maria Kauffman, and I'm a life coach. And today I am drinking some raspberry tea and tipping my hat to Queen Elizabeth. So Sarah, tell us about some of your early signs of genius as you were starting, maybe way even before you even knew what a career was going to be like for you.
That's an interesting way of putting it. I think, I guess I have a problem with the word genius. I don't necessarily embrace that term, but I guess, early signs of being an engineer. I grew up, my dad is also an engineer, and I think it's very common for women engineers to have someone in their family who's also an engineer, so that it's not such a scary profession. But I can remember in elementary school, we had a invention fair contest at our school, and I competed in that in 5th and 6th grade. And in 5th grade, it was right after we had moved, and it was kind of traumatic to me. And so I had invented a collapsible doghouse so that our dog's house could move with us in any future moves. And that one actually didn't win, although I thought it was brilliant. And I was really disappointed it didn't win, but people didn't see the usefulness of this. And the following year in 6th grade, I had invented a sleeping bag with a removable zipper so you could wash it without getting the zipper all messed up. And that one actually won, even though it was much shoddier, prototype that I had made for the contest. And I was like, the other one was wood and painted and beautiful. And I was like, I don't get this.
That's so interesting. Oh, so pretty cool. So, obviously the move. So the dog came with?
Yeah, the dog came with, but we had to leave the house. The dog house too, right? It didn't fit with moving.
Yeah.
So we had to get a new dog house. And I was like, well, you should be able to move a dog house and pack it up so it goes with you.
It's a lot of empathy for the dog, right? You kind of understood, oh, I'm going to have a whole new home. It'd be nice if we could at least take the dog house with us.
Yeah, but it collapsed and folded down into this little package.
Pretty genius, actually. I love it. So what kind of engineering did your dad do?
My dad is a ceramics engineer, so his specialization is in making things out of china and glass and different things like that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I've never actually even heard of that in my engineering travels, so it sounds pretty specific.
But it's definitely very specialized.
A long time ago, I know my mom did a lot of ceramics, so that was, and certainly China's been around, so it's a pretty neat skill to have. Cool. So then that was kind of elementary school. It sounded like, definitely doing a science fair of that nature kind of gets you on a bit of a track and into some interest. What was high school like?
Yeah, so high school, I think I was definitely took a lot of the college prep type classes, some AP classes that our school offered. I think, I guess I took what I would say was fairly normal stuff: physics, chemistry.
You knew you were going to college.
Yeah, I think that was definitely an expectation in my family. Both my parents have college degree. My grandmother was an English teacher, so she had gone to college. So it wasn't a new thing in our family. It was the expectation that you would go, and it was more like, where are you going to go?
So how were you going to decide, or were you already deciding where to go and what to study? Did you know what to study? Which one came first?
Yeah, I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at all, or where I wanted to go. Visited lots of places that I decided I didn't want to go, and it ended up I didn't want to go super in debt. That was a big consideration, and this was a while ago. Not like college debt's even bigger deal now, but I was like, I got offered a position, admittance to Carnegie Mellon, which is a good engineering school, but I was like, I can't justify $100,000 in debt. I'm sure it's even more now, but so I ended up going to Ohio State, or as they like to say, the Ohio State University.
I did try and pull that one off. Yeah.
It makes me laugh. They trademarked the word "the" recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I didn't really know what I want to do, and I don't know if you're familiar with that school. It's huge. It's like the biggest or second biggest university in the country. They have all kinds of things. I did start out in engineering, I guess because growing up, I didn't know what a lot of things were, right? So I had my mom's a social worker, my dad is an engineer. I saw teachers, and they were kind of limited professions that I was exposed to. So I was like, okay, he's an engineer. I know what that is. That sounds good. So I just started in the same major as my dad was. Started as a ceramics engineer originally.
Oh, pretty cool. So in college, is that like a college path that you're going to graduate as a ceramics engineer?
So it used to be its own major at a lot of places. In most schools, including Ohio State, it's now become materials engineering. And they've kind of merged together ceramics, polymers, and metals all together into just the more broad materials field. And I actually did end up changing my major when I was a junior to be metals anyways, because that was where I ended up getting jobs. So I had work experience, and I was like, why would I graduate something I don't have any work experience in?
Yep. I was the same. Certainly with co-op, I was like, I have no idea what I'm getting into. So a little bit of exposure would be better than none. And I loved material science. That was just one class that I took. I just remember just really enjoying it. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe if I had a different interest or different co-op experience, it might have taken me in a different direction. Cool.
Yeah, it's amazing how those things can happen where you end up doing something and then it leads to things, and who knows where you end up.
So you then changed your focus, mid-college career as you're starting to, and I'm sure it's typical how it works. You start getting all that information as you get closer to graduation, and you're trying to pick either a career path or a particular company that you might want to work for. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I guess my experience might be a little different than some people. So I actually got married when I was very young. I got married when I was 21, and I actually had my daughter with 1 quarter left to go at Ohio State. So that was kind of challenging, as you might imagine, to try to juggle all that and still graduate, but I was set on I would graduate. So originally I was supposed to go work at Delphi Automotive Company, which was in the area. It was more like I was looking to stay in the region and something that seemed like it would accommodate, parenthood and things like that. Because not all companies do that or don't, especially, you're talking, over 20 years ago, I think.
Things were different.
Especially then. And actually they gave me a job offer when I was probably 7 months pregnant. So I think a lot of places wouldn't have done that either. But I actually, so I took that job, and then at the very last minute, I actually decided not to do that because I was like, my kid was still maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 months old at the time. So I decided I was going to stay home a little bit longer before. So I ended up reneging on the job offer, which I kind of feel bad about still but it's like, okay, you got to do sometimes what's right for you and your family.
Yeah, it's a hard decision. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. But I did then later on start working part-time at a foundry that needed help with quality stuff. And then, I don't know, things go from there and it all works out.
Yeah, it certainly does. Working at a foundry, though, certainly like that is an interesting environment. Did you, maybe from your father's experience or other things, were you prepared for that kind of work environment? What was that like?
Yeah, I don't know that I ever had. I mean, I've been in industrial places due to my dad's jobs, like ceramics and glass plants. But for foundries, I guess I had a couple classes in that related to that kind of technology in school, including some classes that were like project based. So we actually had to go out and do hands-on projects to help solve problems at the local foundries. And then I had co-opted at a foundry as well. So I was pretty familiar with what that entailed. And I like it because you're making things. Yeah.
You're making things. And I mean, the process is pretty interesting, right? I mean, it's just big. It's kind of loud. The temperature is usually pretty hot and kind of crazy. And
yeah, they're not the cleanest environments.
Not the cleanest, right?
Yeah.
So it is interesting to witness that. I say just because of just the nature, like it's really robust. Once again, it sounds very loud and whatnot. And at the other end, it's amazing to see what comes in one side and goes out the other. Just that whole process.
Yeah, I definitely like the fact that like you can see what the impact of what you do is, right? Whether you're making, I don't know, big gear or valve or whatever, it's concrete.
Very, very concrete. Cool. So any other things early in your career that stand out as stories that you'd love to share, that was working your way to where you are right now? How do you put foundry into becoming a serial entrepreneur?
Well, I guess a couple of things. So my entrepreneurship does tend to relate to the metals industry. And I guess the other thing so the foundry that I worked at, both of those were fairly small. So the one was maybe, I don't know, 50 people. And even though as a co-op student, I did all kinds of things. They had me taking inventory. They had me writing quality documents, doing modeling. And so I kind of got used to for entrepreneurship, you have to wear a lot of hats. And I think that being in those kind of environments, that prepared me to be used to that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is so true. Wearing a lot of hats and just being curious as to the nature of all those different tasks and responsibilities. There is a lot that comes with it. Cool.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
I was
going to say, at the time I was tasked with doing inventory at that foundry as an intern. I thought it was just some kind of scut work they made the intern do. And it was only much later in my career that I really appreciated the importance of taking inventory. And that means they really trusted me to do that. And it was a really important task. But at the time I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to count all these things.
It's a bit of a grind, right?
Yeah.
But, I too, very similar, even especially being a co-op, it tends to, you kind of get, the learning level assignments, if you will. But as I grew in my responsibility too, and I was working for a small company doing project work where you had to do the whole thing. There is an appreciation for counting things because, if parts come in wrong, and you don't take the time early on to pay attention to how these components are coming in, it's kind of hard to get the thing right going out the door. So yeah, there's so many little tasks that come along. So cool. So where did you go next, and how did your career progress?
So I was working part-time at that foundry. It was called Foam Casting. And then I decided I wanted to go back to grad school. I thought at the time that I wanted to become a professor. So, the track to becoming a professor is getting your PhD and jumping through those hoops. So I ended up going to Ohio State for grad school. And I didn't hugely like it, but I kind of thought it was, the project. And then so I got my master's degree, and then I changed schools and projects. And then it was like, no, what I don't really like is theoretical research.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to ask what part didn't you like?
I think just the idea of like doing research that didn't seem to have like a concrete impact. Like, I'm not big on doing just like research for the sake of doing research or writing papers just for research, paper counts and things like that, which is kind of how academia works. So I ended up initially not finishing the PhD because I was like, I'm just writing papers that 3 people in the world are going to read, and who cares? Like, I don't even get excited about this. I ended up deciding that was not the career track for me. But sometimes it's important to find out what you don't like and don't want to do. Yeah,
and all of that is totally okay, right? Right.
Right.
Because now I'm interested. So you say no to that opportunity, but you are finishing a PhD at the moment. So I don't want to get off a track either with the chronology or how the PhD came back, but however you want to take us down the journey.
We can kind of go down that since I mentioned it. Yeah. So I did end up leaving school in, I guess it'd be about 2005. And I didn't, I could have at that point in time applied for a master's degree, but I decided maybe I'll come back. So I just didn't apply for anything, and I just withdrew. And I was done with my coursework. So I was actually like, the dissertation was left, which is, not trivial, but it's also like, hey, there was a lot completed towards it. But my logic was that I already have a master's degree in engineering. What's the point of a second one? Like, maybe I'll come back. And then I just didn't. And then a bunch of time passed. And then I talked to them, and they're like, oh, it's expired. Like, this is what their like secretary of the department was like, it's expired. You'd have to start over. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's done. And I just kind of, that door's shut, right? Okay. Well, then later, with my current startup company, we were working on our R&D project for the Department of Energy, and I asked my professor to do some tests for me. And I thought he might charge me, but he didn't do that. But he was just like, why does your website not mention WPI? And I'm like, well, because I dropped out, and it's awkward, like, to just say, like, what do I say about this? And he's like, you need to come back and finish. You're doing research now. Like, just write the dissertation with what you're doing. So he talked me into coming back and working on that on the side and, finish up what I had started many, many years ago. So that's why
that is so cool. Actually, nice.
Yeah. And actually, although technically the stuff has expired, they're like, oh, you can ask the graduate committee to, waive that deadline and still count it. Like, they'll make, just because it says the policy says that, like, doesn't mean that it can't be like modified. There's flexibility there. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, that's important to know. And I'm starting to hear this a lot, just in that, I think the more distracted and the more information we get, the more we listen to these things and we think that it is like a black and white thing. And this is the way it maybe needs to be or has to be. So being flexible and knowing that you can always open a door that might have even been shut is really important to share.
Yeah, that you can appeal things, and like there are sometimes higher authorities. Yeah, I had no idea. I was like, oh, okay, let's do that then.
let's do that. Very cool. So how did you get into entrepreneurship?
Well, so that place I'd mentioned, Met Foam Casting, it was a startup, and I think in some ways that made it less scary because I had already worked at a startup company. And then I worked at a startup plant that was owned by a Fortune 500 company, but the plant was a startup. So again, kind of like baby steps into it. And finally, I think kind of the thing that first prompted me to like consider doing it myself was I went to this. So when I went to business school at Carnegie Mellon, they had an entrepreneurship boot camp that was optional that you could attend before real classes started. It was like a week-long seminar thing where they had all these different speakers and talked about entrepreneurship. And one of the speakers said something along the lines of, everyone there was basically getting an annuity. I don't know if you're familiar with an annuity, which is like a guaranteed, salary payment if you graduate, right? Like, MBAs from there at that school make a certain amount. And they're basically saying like, that is your safety net. So if you want to go down to entrepreneurship road, your fallback plan is going back and getting this kind of job, kind of working for the man. So if you fail, you're going to work for the man. But if you don't try, that's what you're going to be doing in the first place. So they're like, there's not really as much risk as you think. And it kind of made me feel, I don't know, safer that like, all right, we could do this. We could try this, even if there is risk.
Oh yeah. Once again, super important.
Yeah. I think, anything's high risk or unknown is definitely sometimes scary. And I think that makes people less likely to try.
Yeah. So, and when you're doing that, it's kind of like, you're kind of in for a chunk of time. I mean, it's not like, a quick feedback, if you will. So you're kind of making a bit of a commitment. You just have to stay consistent and kind of go for it.
I mean, I think startups are very rapid environments where there's so much to do and so much changing all the time. A lot of times you have to pivot, but I think, there is some level where you got to be committed and trying things. But I mean, I think some of it's just like, all right, just got to be brave.
Well, yeah, walk us through one, and tell us what it's like even to take that first step.
Yeah, I think so. For the first startup that I co-founded, we worked with so most places have small business development centers, SBDCs, or other organizations like SCORE or entrepreneurship centers. There are all these kinds of organizations, some of which are nonprofits or the government set up that will try to help you understand how to do things. So we had gotten help locally to help us get a small business loan to start this initial company. The problem and part of why it did not end up being successful was we started this in 2008, 9, that time period, which is Great Recession. Not a great time for building a foundry or a technology materials company. So in that way, it ended up being a lot of lessons. And figuring things out. And some of them I think are lessons that entrepreneurship tells you books and people will tell you, but sometimes you don't really understand until you live that experience.
I was going to say, yes, absolutely. You don't know until you know, right? But
or it doesn't make sense until you really go through and you're like, oh, oh, that's what they were talking about.
That's what they were talking about, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So it's got to be busy too. So you get in and there's all kinds of things, especially the first time.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of getting up to speed on all these different functions that, like, at a big company, there are lots of people responsible for lots of things, right? You have an HR department with policies and people, and the startup, no, you have to figure out how you're going to hire people or advertise or what you're even looking for, so that's just like one function, right? There's accounting, taxes, inventory, like all these things, and that you just have to figure out. And I was talking about this recently with somebody was like, yeah, you can't possibly know all the things you need to know because there's too much, and no one, until you do it, you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you just gotta get up to speed as best you can. So now that I'm on, my second school is my second one that I've co-founded. Like, I know a lot more. I'm still learning, but there are things I knew before. I'm like, oh, okay, you bring the skills are transferable, or I know how to do them. Like, okay, this is the paperwork we need to do, or whatever. So you kind of figure these things out as you go.
Yeah, it gets quicker. What's kind of neat, because like you said, it's almost like those young years, those teenage years where you're a bit invincible the first time. You don't know what you know, but as you go through again, you're just more experienced. You can do it more efficiently and faster.
Yeah, we definitely learned a lot of lessons the hard way. Actually, when my spouse is the co-founder of this company, and before we decided to start school, we were like, all right, we need to do a post-mortem of all of the things that we would have done differently on the first business. And because we don't want to make the same mistake. We'll make new mistakes, different mistakes. We're not going to make the same mistakes as the first time. So kind of went through that process of what was everything that had been done wrong the first time.
Yeah. So is that kind of like after the dust settles, and what does, maybe even getting to a point where you're going to make an evaluation? What's that like? Does that mean that you're actually, kind of saying goodbye and transitioning, or?
No, this was actually quite some time. So we ended up closing that first business. And because it was an SBA loan, we actually had to personally pay that loan off. We guaranteed it for a couple of years, even after the business had closed. So that was a little bit painful. So no, I think, I want to say like 4 or 5 years had passed. So it was clearly looking back at why did that business and that, entrepreneurship endeavor not work? Like, what did we do wrong? And there were a variety of things that were like, all right, let's do these differently this time.
Yeah. So it sounds like that was almost in preparation as you're starting the next one.
Yeah. Because we were like, are we really going to do this again? Like,
right.
Are we sure? Like, are we crazy?
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Good. Well, that's so interesting. What do you think underneath all that? What is the driving motivator? What does give you the courage and maybe even whatever it is what's the recipe for you?
So I guess my main motivator is I want to make a difference in what I do professionally. And so the technology niche we work on is an area called lost foam casting, which is a much more environmentally friendly, greener technology than conventional casting methods. And it also financially makes sense as a process, even though it's not that popular, which is kind of strange because most of the time you think green things cost more. So it's just we think this is a solution to a lot of society's problems that, and as an engineer, I want to make things efficient. I want to solve problems. So that's one of the big drivers, is that we can do this in a more sustainable manner.
Well, that's pretty cool, because, we had talked before, and our title, which I kind of wanted to pull out, that is that you kind of have I would imagine, a passion and a mission, because that there's a solution. but then you're looking for problems, I guess, to satisfy or to serve a market to make the business work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we have, if you talk about casting, like there are a lot of things that either are castings already, whether it's, your engine block on your car or, valves and pumps and gears. And like, there's like I don't know if it's a statistic exactly, but the American Foundry Society says you're never more than 10 feet away from a casting, that they're everywhere. You're not necessarily even aware of them. So it's like a broad process that can make all kinds of things. It can also make things that are made by machining or welding or stamping or like all these other processes could be replaced with casting. So it's all over the place as a process. Yeah. So then we're trying to like talk to people like, okay, do they have problems in their current manufacturing methods?
Yeah. So you can do something for them. Does that make the sales conversation different, or those interaction with customers, marketing, all those things?
Yeah, I don't necessarily so if I think about sales, I often think about it like car salesman, like used car salesman or something like that. And that's definitely like not how it's more like I spend a lot of time educating people that this process even exists. And sometimes they'll present things to me and I'm like, okay, that is not good for our process. Like you should look at, and I'll like try to direct them in a place that seems like a good manufacturing process for whatever it is they're trying to do. So that does tend to be a lot more how our sales interactions go. It's more education and just analysis of like, is this going to make sense?
Yeah. So are you typically trying to find people, or do people seek you out? What does that look like?
A little bit of both. So we do have people who just, they find out about us and approach us. And then there are a number of like technology innovations that our company has, but some of which are related to like additive manufacturing and service hardening. So then we're trying to look for people with specific types of problems where those are, they might be looking for additive manufacturing in a broader sense, but they don't necessarily know our process even exists. So then it's talking to people about, these alternative, these newer processes that are coming down the line.
Yeah, cool. So certainly it's challenging being an entrepreneur. What are some of the bonuses that you didn't expect along the way? Looking back, what's something that you want to share with somebody, a story, or some of the benefits, maybe personally or, even in the industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I guess with the current school, so the interesting thing is being in the additive manufacturing space, because that is pretty much an up and coming technology area. There are probably, 25, at least 25 additive manufacturing processes. So to me, it's really cool to get to know all these different processes and where they're using them in a lot of really cool things like space rockets and things like for companies that are going into like the moon or things like, they have a lot of really cool things that are going on development wise. So I just like to be like, know what's going on technology wise. It's like so exciting. I think a lot of the things that are going on, whether it's space or, environmental energy efficiency, I do like I like that aspect of it a lot.
Yeah, because I almost don't even know what to ask. It must be a very interesting, just place to be and business to be a part of.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And it's a really interesting, I guess, industry in that everybody is really like, shares information and wants to help everyone, because it's such a new industry. There's also like a big organization in additive called Women in 3D Printing. that is a big organization that got, it's just because someone decided that there weren't enough women and they were going to start. Actually, they started it as a blog, just talking about women in the industry. And then it's now become this organization with like over 100 chapters globally, and they have a conference. I mean, and this is like all been maybe in the past 7 years. It's really taken off. And I don't know what the normal manufacturing amount of women is. I think it's less than 10%. And I think with an additive, women are probably about 20%. It is definitely a little bit more. I mean, it's not at parity, but it's more women than if you're talking about a foundry or a steel mill. And so I also like that aspect, and everybody's, trying to work together to make things better.
So just to highlight that, so there's a group, Women in 3D Printing, about 7 years old, and all women, basically specializing in this domain.
Yeah, they're actually, as an organization, open to everyone, but it's more around like trying to increase diversity in the field. They have a thing called the TIPE conference, TIPE. It's an acronym for something. I can't remember, but they have, and it's this additive conference that all the speakers are women. Everyone can come. It's free. It's online. The old ones are on YouTube. So if you want to learn about additive, check it out. But that got started because the people in women in 3D printing were mad because there'd be all these conferences with, 6 guys on the stage and no women. And they'd be like, oh, well, we don't know who to ask. There aren't any women speakers. So they're like, all right, well, you have no excuse if we can have an entire conference. That's women.
I love it. I love it. I'll have to make sure that I include the link to that in the show notes for sure. Awesome. Cool. Any other anecdotes or things that you say, what, keeps you inspired with what you're doing right now, or possibly as you look into other avenues? And if you're a serial entrepreneur, what does the future kind of have in store for you?
Yeah, I guess that's a couple of things there. So I guess going back to the TIPE conference, like I like there learning about what some of the other people are doing. So like there was a woman who she has made an entire business and has several employees just making cookie cutters, 3D printing cookie cutters on a desktop printer that you can buy at like, Best Buy for like, a couple $100. And that's like her business is making custom cookie cutters. So it's not all of additive is like super, crazy high-tech rocket engines. I mean, it could be something simple like that. And there was also a young woman, I think she was like 18 or 19, who does that additive to make robots, like for children's robot making. So there's all kinds of things in it. So I think that's pretty exciting. For my own company, we are doing a couple of projects, basically trying to do reverse engineer some means of manufacturing obsolete parts from some of the older military planes, like the C-130 is a transport plane that it's hard for them to source parts for because it was designed in like, I don't know, the 50s or 60s. It's and some of those original manufacturers of things, they don't exist anymore. So that's pretty exciting to try to help them be able to still use this plane that they need.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, I guess the other thing. So there's this thing that I'm working on. There's called FedTech Startup Studio. So I am on a team. So this is for a third startup company where I'm directly helping co-found, that we are working on a brand new company related to, what do I want to say here? Basically a high pixel, higher resolution, multispectral camera. So what that means is it can see not just visual light, but it can see infrared and X-ray as well. And it can see with much greater detail than current technologies. So we are currently evaluating where that device where it makes sense at all, and where like would be like the best beachhead market to try to take this product to commercialization.
Oh, cool. Like you had me at the title. I didn't know where that was going to go, but it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah. So it's, there's actually, like, if people are interested in technology, there's a lot of technology that comes out of the national labs and NASA and things like that, where they do the basic research and they're kind of like, okay, we have this thing, we don't know what to do with it, and we're engineers and scientists, and we're not necessarily, you know, commercial people, and they're just, so there are a lot of these technologies looking for people to, you know, take them and run with them and make companies out of them if there's, you know, some kind of use case there. So that's kind of what we're working on. And the FedTech is a process to do that, but like a lot of these, anybody could, you know, start a business if that's what they're interested in, something technology along that line.
Well, that is really interesting, because it does sound like there's obviously a huge need to creating almost, you know, solution after solution after solution, seeing what might stick and where people might take that opportunity then once a solution is provided, to see how they can make a connection between, you know, problems out there that need that solution. It's just an interesting perspective to take. Yeah,
it is pretty different because, you know, we didn't develop this technology. It was developed originally at one of the national labs, and I'm not sure if they had some problem they were originally trying to solve it. Now they have this camera that they're like, okay. And I think I got put on the team because I have a background related to additive manufacturing, and that was their hypothesis, was that was where it made the most sense to be used. And now we've done a bunch of market research, talking to lots of different people, and there's probably some use case in additive, but that's not the biggest pain point that we've come across. And so we might at some point go down that pro market, but like we've found much better pain points and I think you do that just by talking to people, right? That people love to complain about their problems.
Don't you love it? Kind of a good thing. Kind of.
Well, I mean, but if, you know, if they think you can help them and you're just like, okay, tell me about this problem. Like why is it, right? You know, what are you doing now? And you're like, so we're looking at an area where like their current, you know, they currently solve this by just like a person visually, like subjectively judging, like, is this okay or not? As opposed to like, you know, using X-ray to scan, like, no, is it like, can you quantitatively say, yes, it's good? Like,
so that's a differentiator.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, well, this would probably be a big improvement, and people appear willing to pay for it, which is, I mean, that's another key part of entrepreneurship, right?
Right.
You have to have somebody who's willing to buy it.
Right. So sometimes timing, right? So maybe at this stage in the game, not willing to pay for it, but technology and things just change so much. I just find that interesting as well. So you have so many skills. Metallurgy is, I guess, one of them. I don't know what is it? Is it a mixture of all these skill sets that makes you so unique, or what's your real superpower?
I guess I would say a couple of things. So I think keeping an open mind and always wanting to learn things, not thinking like, okay, I'm not done. Like I don't, you know, I'm always learning things all the time. So I think that's an important superpower. I'm also developed skills from prior jobs to be very good at facilitation and connecting people. So I feel like that's also really important to the entrepreneurship journey. I am a big believer in, like, I guess, entrepreneurship karma. So if somebody comes to me that's not something that makes sense for me to solve, like I will gladly like refer that to somebody. And then generally those people also will think of you if it's, you know, the shoe is on the other foot. And I think that is the way, you know, we all get better and develop our businesses. So yeah, practice that kind of helping others is really a key.
Cool. I love that. It sounds like, because just basically be a good person, kind of those networking and those leadership or soft skills, certainly are powerful. But the science underneath also must, I would say, open doors for you relative to, and that's probably just unique for anybody, right? And just to take whatever those more technical skills, and knowing that it's going to walk you down a journey or a path that you're just going to be someplace that you need to be doing the right work that you're meant to do.
Yeah, I mean, I actually probably spent about 7 years where I wasn't really doing much technical. After I got my MBA, I was doing marketing and forecasting, supply chain stuff, which was also very good skills to learn from entrepreneurship, to understand, one, how those things work, and then two, to understand how big businesses, how those kind of companies work on the inside, was very useful to being an entrepreneur. On the technical side, yeah, I think it's good to know something about what you're doing. Although a lot of times, like for instance, this camera, like I am not a technical expert on multispectral cameras. There are other people on the team who understand physics and the details of how that works. So at some level, it's like, okay, these skills become transferable in a lot of cases.
And you don't need to know everything.
Yeah, you can't know everything. And, I think you just have to be willing to learn quickly, learn enough. I guess that's another thing. I had to get over the perfectionist type of mentality that sometimes it's got to be, there's too much to do, and then you just have to be like, all right, that's good enough. It'll work.
Nothing like a deadline to kind of help you get over that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely a perfectionist, and I'm sure, I believe, there's probably many things that go into that, but looking back at my career, sometimes, I was most of the time the only woman in the room. So I know that because of that, there's probably a layer of my perfectionism that came around just because, I just kind of felt like, I didn't want the obvious to be pointed in the direction and be like, I'm representing, women, or on some level, I wanted to at least be able to be perfect enough to represent appropriately. But yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So my experience at Emerson, I worked at Emerson for about 4 years as their forecast manager, and coming from engineering and aerospace engineering at that, where you had to be precise and you had to be accurate and totally, because
it matters.
We don't want planes to crash.
Yes.
It matters. Yeah. So then being in forecasting, where it's like, okay, so the number is somewhere, plus or minus $100 million of love. Like that was the level of accuracy. So it's like, all right, I got to the point. It's like, all right, I am always wrong in this. It's like there's some relativity, and I think that got me used to like, all right, it's not, it cannot be perfect. So then, yeah. Accepting.
Having that freedom.
Adequate.
Adequate, right. A different level of adequate. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Cool. So where's the future going? In any direction, that you see? I usually ask on women's leadership, certainly with a place out there that's doing women in 3D and having all women speakers. It's obviously refreshing and important to see what the need for diversity, just for creativity. But where do you see the work that you're doing heading maybe, 10 or even 100 years from now?
Oh, wow. That's pretty far out. 100 years. That's hard to imagine.
That's why I like to say it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So our company is primarily right now, we're doing a lot of R&D and being funded with non-dilutive funding mechanisms like the Small Business Innovation Research SBIR program. So one thing that's interesting about that is that I'm always reading these topic calls where the government's trying to fund research, which kind of gives you an inkling of where things are going. So there's all kinds of things going, with AI and machine learning. They are working on autonomous flying cars, like the Jetsons type thing. I mean, I don't know how long it will take to get there, but I think that's pretty interesting. Self-driving cars and then like self-flying cars, like that would be very cool. I don't know, maybe my company will be able to make parts for those kinds of systems. But there's definitely a lot of interesting things in that space, as well as, of course, electric vehicles and trying to get like decarbonize and make things more energy efficient, deal with all these environmental issues that are coming.
Yeah. There'll always be problems for us to solve, and certainly always solutions for problems as well.
Right.
Always. Is there something inspirational that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so my favorite quote is a quote from Tolkien, from one of the Lord of the Rings books. It's actually from a poem, but the part I like is it says, "Not all who wander are lost." And I like this because I think, if you think about entrepreneurship, a lot of times people think it's just like the straight path, or maybe it was an overnight thing. And like, that's totally not how it works. It's up and down and, sidetracked and lost maybe for a little ways on your way to where you're targeting to get to. And so, so just keep that in mind.
I love it. At any point in time, whether you think you're on a path or the right path or the wrong path, it's all good.
It'll get you where you're supposed to be.
It will always get you where you're supposed to be. Well, Sarah, it was such an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for bringing a lot of that information. It's a gold mine of information, really, with this interview. I will make sure that I leave some notes and some links in the show notes so that people can get in contact with you and access some of the things that we talked about. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hold on a second. Coffee Time with Kauffman is the comfortable place to discuss women's leadership, because I am on a mission to help the world discover the truth about what women are capable of. When you are ready for your leadership mastery makeover, go to mariakaufman.com and click on Consult a Coach, where you can schedule time with me for an empowerment session. Have a great week. Enjoy your adventures and journey responsibly. Thanks again.